white ship had no guns, and the Karun fired on it anyway. It floated in the dark above a dead-end world called Senat Reach, and it was the cleanest thing the reckoner Otha Vumel had ever seen through a forward lens. Long, slow, 1,600 meters of pale plating that had never been cut from anything that died, marked with one symbol on every flank, a plain cross inside a ring, repeated 9 times down the hull so that no scanner, in any language, could mistake what it was. A hospital, a ship full of the sick and the cut open and the half-mended. It carried no shield grid worth the name. It carried no lance, no rail, no missile cradle. It carried 4,010 beds, and 3,040 of them were full. Uther knew all of this because the white ship had told him. It had been telling everyone for 6 days. Its signal went out on every open band at once, slow and patient. The same flat message looped in 40 tongues. This is the hospital ship Quiet Harbor. We hold the wounded of 9 worlds. We are not armed. Please hold your fire. The Karuan tithe swarm received that message clearly. They had very good ears. They simply did not care. Because a hospital ship, to the Karun, was not a thing to spare. It was a harvest already gathered. 3,000 bodies in one hull, weakened, immobile, packed in rows, reactors still warm, medicine, metal, water, and meat, all of it sorted and waiting, none of it able to run. In the long carrion tongue of the swarm, there was a single word for a ship like that, and the word meant ripe. So the Karuan came to take it. They came the way they always came, which was the only way they knew, not a fleet, a tide. 11,000 hulls of every shape, lashed together and torn apart, and lashed again, across 40 centuries of feeding, a moving reef of scavenged plating that blotted out the stars behind it as it crossed the reach. The swarm did not build ships, the swarm wore them. Every plate on every Karuan hull had been cut from something that died, and the bigger a clan mass grew, the more death it had eaten, so that size itself was their only law. The largest mass in the tide, the Harvest Mother Grel Vanu, was 19 kilometers of welded graveyard, and Othe rode in her gut, and he had never once in his 200 years of reckoning seen prey that did not break. He had logged the breaking of 940 worlds. That was his record, his whole life, written in the oldest carrion tongue. 940 cries received and read as ripe and answered with the tide. Every one of those worlds had sent the same sound into the dark before it ended, the begging sound, the sound a small animal makes in the grip of the thing that eats it, and Othe had learned to hear that sound as a kind of music, the music of a harvest sorting itself for the taking. He logged the hospital ship as a 4-hour task. He was wrong by a margin that would be taught to Karun younglings for the rest of the species' life, however long that turned out to be. The first wave was 300 light hulls, the small fast biters the swarm sent ahead to cripple engines so the prey could not flee. They crossed the gap in 9 minutes. The Quiet Harbor did not flee. It could not. It turned its blunt nose toward them, slow as a glacier, and it kept broadcasting its flat, patient message, "Please hold your fire, please hold your fire," even as the first lances struck its flank and burned a long black scar across the painted cross. Other watched the hull breach on his lens. He watched air vent in a silver plume 900 meters long. He watched, on a closer band, the inside of the ship for 1 stolen second, because the Karun had cut into a comms relay and the hospital's own internal feed spilled out into the dark, and Othe Vumel, reckoner of the Grel Vanu, saw a thing he was not built to understand. He saw people running toward the breach. Not away, toward. The hospital crew, the unarmed ones, the menders, were running into the venting deck, where the cold and the fire were, and they were dragging beds out by hand, and they were throwing their own bodies over the wounded who could not be moved. And one of them, a small figure in white, was standing in the open wound of the hull with a sealing tool, working, while the dark poured in around her. Her name was Marn Aldous. Mother did not know that yet. He would learn it. The whole swarm would learn it. Every clan mass, every reckoner, every harvest mother across 40 centuries of feeding, because of what she did in the next 90 seconds, and the thing she did right after. For 6 days before the firing began, the swarm had circled the Quiet Harbor the way it circled everything, slow and certain, reading it. Uthe had run the full reckoning on the white ship himself. He had measured its plating, which was thin. He had measured its weapons, which were none. He had measured its speed, which was the speed of a thing that did not expect to run, and he had measured the 3,040 warm bodies inside it, each one a separate small reading on his lens, each one weak, each one sorted, each one a portion of the harvest. He had filed the white ship in the carrion record under the highest grade of ripe, a perfect harvest, a thing already gathered, the easiest taking in 200 years of reckoning. He had been so certain of it that he had let the smaller clan masses go ahead first to share the feeding, a courtesy, a thing a confident harvest mother did when the prey was sure. He had been more certain of the white ship than he had ever been of anything. That was the shape of the trap, though Othe did not know it yet. The Karaoon were never more certain than when they were about to be wrong, because certainty was the thing the harvest fed on, and a thing as ripe as a hospital ship made the whole swarm drunk on certainty. Every reckoner, every clan mass, every weapon crew, all of them sure, all of them looking at the easy warm gathered harvest, and none of them looking at the cold hole in space behind it, where the stars had been switched off for an hour. The Long Mercy had counted on that. It had let the swarm be certain. It had let 300 reckoners file it as empty dark while it sat in the middle of the harvest and waited for the white ship to be fired on, because a thing that is certain it is about to feed does not check the dark behind its own back. In 200 years of reckoning, Othe had watched 10,000 prey crews in the moment of the breach, and they had all done the same thing, the only thing, the sane thing. They ran for the far bulkheads. They sealed the dying away behind them to save the living. They chose. That was the law of every species the Karaoon had ever harvested, the law that made them all alike, the law that made them ripe. When the dark comes in, you give it the weakest first, because the weakest are already lost, and you do not throw the strong after the lost. Every world Othe had ever logged had obeyed that law. It was the reason they all broke. A thing that will trade its weak for its strong can always, in the end, be made to trade everything. Marn Aldis broke the law. She did not run for the bulkhead. She ran into the breach. She put her own body between the dark and a row of beds that could not move, and she sealed the wound with the wounded still in it, because to her, the wounded were the point, the whole point, the only point, and she would have died before she gave them to the cold. She lost 2 fingers to the freeze doing it, and she did not stop. She sealed 1,600 square meters of breached hull, with 1 tool and 1 hand in 90 seconds. And 3,040 people who should have been a harvest stayed, instead, alive. Then she went to the broadcast deck, past the dying loop of "Please hold your fire," and she changed the message. She did not send a plea, she did not beg. The Karaoon had heard 10,000 pleas across 40 centuries, and every one of them was the same sound, the sound that meant ripe, and Marn Aldis somehow knew that, the way a small animal knows the shape of the thing that eats it. So she sent something else. She sent 6 words, flat and quiet, on the same open band the Karaoon had been mocking for 6 days. 6 words aimed not at the tide closing on her, but at one cold point of light a very long way off, a point that had been listening the whole time and saying nothing. We are the quiet harbor. Come. And 11 light hours away, in the black between 2 dead stars, something that had been holding very still for a very long time finished listening, and began to move. Othe Vumel did not hear the answer. No Karaoon did. The answer was not a signal. It came on no band, in no tongue, made no sound a carrion ear could catch. The first the swarm knew of it was a change in the dark behind the hospital ship, a place where the stars stopped being stars and became instead the edge of a hull so large and so unlit that the reckoners had been reading it for an hour as empty space. It was not empty space, it was gray. It was a single warship, and it was already inside the harvest, and it had been there longer than the Karaoon had been firing, and it had let them fire so that every clan mass in the tide would be looking the wrong way when the lights came on. They came on now. The gray warship had a name, and the name was Long Mercy, and it was the cruelest joke the Karaoon would ever be told. It was 1,600 meters of dark plating, the same length as the hospital it had come to shield, smaller than 4 of the clan masses now turning to face it, smaller than the harvest mother by a factor of 12. It had no painted cross. It had no welded reef of scavenged hulls riding its back. It was clean and blunt and ugly in a way that the Karaoon, who wore beauty stolen from 1,000 dead species, found almost offensive. It looked like one solid thing, cut from one piece, built by people who did not need to steal, because they made their own. Uther Vumal read its mass and felt, for the first time in 200 years of reckoning, a small wrong note in his gut. Because the warship was the same color as the dark. Not painted dark, cold. Every Karoon hull ran hot, because a fed thing was a warm thing, and the tide glowed across the spectrum like a wound that would not close. The Long Mercy gave off nothing. It had crossed 11 light hours and slipped into the middle of an 11,000 hull harvest, and it had done it running so cold that 300 reckoners with the best carrion eyes in the galaxy had filed it as a hole in space, a ship that could hide inside the thing that was hunting it. That was the first lesson, and the swarm did not learn it, because the swarm had never needed to learn anything. The swarm only ate. The Harvest Mother gave the order every Harvest Mother had given for 40 centuries. Converge, smother. The tide did not maneuver, because a tide does not maneuver. It simply turned its mass toward the small gray thing and began to close, 11,000 hulls folding inward like a mouth, and the math of it was the only math the Karuan had ever needed. Nothing survived being inside the mouth. Size was law. The biggest mass ate, and the Grelvanu was the biggest mass that had ever fed. The Long Mercy did not run from the mouth. It went toward the part of the mouth that was already wounded. It went toward the hospital. Othe watched it on his lens, and could not understand the line it was flying. The gray ship was not running for open dark, where its cold and its speed would let it slip the tide. It was turning back, into the densest part of the closing mass, putting itself between 300 Karoon biters and the breached white hull of the quiet harbor. It was choosing the worst possible position. It was choosing to be surrounded. It was choosing to stand over the thing it had come to protect, in the middle of the harvest, where the mouth was tightest. The reckoner understood it as a mistake. He logged it as a mistake. He was wrong, and the wrongness of it was the whole shape of the war that followed, because the Long Mercy was not trying to escape the mouth. It was trying to make the mouth close on itself. The first Karuan biter to reach the gray ship was a clan thing called by a name that meant sharp hunger, 400 meters of scavenged teeth, and it came in fast, the way the small ones always did, lance first, aiming for the engine line to cripple and slow. The Long Mercy did not dodge, it did not raise a shield. It let the lance come, and the lance struck the gray hull dead on the flank, and the lance did nothing. The light splashed. That was the word Othe's instruments gave him, the only word that fit. The Karoon lance, a weapon that had opened 10,000 prey hulls, hit the gray plating and splashed, and ran off it, and the Long Mercy did not so much as turn from its course. The reckoners read the plating depth and refused to believe it. The gray ship was not armored the way prey was armored, in layers you cut through one at a time. It was armored the way a stone is armored, all the way down, the same hard thing from skin to keel, a hull that did not have an inside to reach. Sharp hunger came around for a second pass, and on the second pass the Long Mercy answered, and the answer was the second lesson, and it was worse. The gray ship did not fire a lance back. It did not fire anything Othe could name. A line of pale light, thin as a wire, and the color of cold iron, reached out from the warship's spine and touched Sharp Hunger once, very gently, across the seam where the clan thing's stolen plates were welded together, and the seam opened. Not blew apart. Opened, the way a thing comes apart along the grain when you have found exactly where it was joined, and 400 meters of Karuan biter unfolded into its component dead ships, every stolen plate falling away from every other, until there was nothing left but a slow drifting cloud of the graveyard it had always been. The Long Mercy had not destroyed Sharp Hunger. It had unbuilt it. It had taken a thing made of death and given the death back. Othe Vumal felt the wrong note in his gut become a sound he could hear. Because the Karuan were made of seams, that was the secret at the bottom of the swarm, the thing no prey had ever lived long enough to learn. Every clan mass, every biter, every harvest mother, including the great Grelvanu herself, was not one ship. It was thousands of ships, lashed and welded and grown together over centuries of feeding, and the welds were the only thing holding the mass into the shape of a hunter. The swarm was the most fearsome thing in the galaxy, and it was also, all the way through, a thing held together with scars. and the gray warship had crossed 11 light hours and gone cold to read as empty space, and stood over a hospital in the tightest part of the mouth for one reason: so that when it began cutting seams, the entire tide would be packed too close to get away from what came apart. The Long Mercy began cutting seams. It did not hurry. That was the thing the Reckoner would remember longest, the thing he would write in the carrion record, in a hand that shook. The gray ship did not panic, did not spray fire in every direction, did not fight like a thing that was outnumbered 11,000 to 1. It moved through the closing mouth at the same slow, patient pace the hospital ship had used, the pace of something with nowhere it needed to be in a hurry, and it touched seams. One thin, pale line, one gentle stroke, and another biter unfolded. Another. In the first 90 seconds it unbuilt 11 hulls. It worked the way Marn Aldis had worked the breach in her own hull, calm hands in a screaming dark, doing the next right thing, and then the next, and the Karoon could not make it flinch. The clan masses converged faster. This was their answer to everything. When a prey did not break, you brought more mass. The Grell Vanu herself, 19 kilometers of welded graveyard, turned her vast, slow bulk toward the gray speck and began to close, and behind her 4 lesser harvest mothers did the same, and the mouth that had been tight grew tighter, 11,000 hulls crushing inward on a single point, and Othevumal watched the trap close and felt the first real fear of his life, because he had finally seen it. The trap was closing on the wrong thing. Every hull the swarm pushed inward was a hull pressed against another hull, seam against seam against seam, and every seam was a place the gray ship could open, and now there was nowhere for the unfolding to go. When the Long Mercy unbuilt a biter in open space, the dead plates drifted away harmlessly. But the tide was no longer open space. The tide had packed itself solid around its own prey, and when the gray ship opened a seam now, 400 meters of suddenly loose plating did not drift away. It slammed into the hull behind it, which strained the welds of that hull, which the Long Mercy then opened too. One stroke could start a cascade through 9 packed hulls before it spent itself. The harvest had become a structure under load, and the warship was pulling the load-bearing pins. The harvest mother tried, then, the thing the swarm did when fire did not work, which was to board. She loosed her boarding masses, 10,000 carrion things bred to swarm a prey hull, and cut it open from the inside, and they crossed the short gap to the gray ship in a black cloud, and they reached it, and they landed on it, and they found nothing to cut. The Long Mercy had no seams. It had no joints to pry, no plates to lever, no welds to crack. Because it had never been assembled, it had been made, one solid thing from skin to keel, and the boarding masses crawled across its cold gray flank, like insects across a stone, and could not get in, and the gray ship did not even slow to brush them off. It simply went on opening seams in the tide, while 10,000 boarders clung uselessly to a hull that did not have an inside, and Othevumal watched his own deepest weapon fail against the one prey that offered it no purchase. And he understood that the humans had built the Long Mercy, by studying the Karoon, by learning exactly what a thing made of seams does to a prey, and then building a thing with no seams at all. The boarders ran out of air and died on the gray flank and drifted off in the dark, 10,000 of them, and the count of unbuilt hulls did not pause for any of it. Other ran a thing then that no reckoner ran in the middle of a harvest, because no harvest had ever needed it run. He ran the cost the other way. He asked his instruments how many lances, how many rails, how many boarders, how much fire of every kind the swarm could possibly bring to bear on one point, all of it at once, the full and total weight of 40 centuries of feeding focused on a single 1,600-meter hull. The instruments gave him the number. It was a number that had ended 940 worlds, and then he asked them what that number would do to the Long Mercy, and the instruments were quiet for a moment, the way instruments are quiet when they have been asked to measure a wall against a wave, and then they gave him the answer, and the answer was nothing. The full weight of the tithe swarm, every weapon it had ever stolen, brought to bear on one gray hull, would scorch the paint that was not there and change nothing else, because the hull did not have an inside to reach, and the crew did not have a will that could be broken, and the doctrine did not have a word for stop. The swarm was a wave, the Long Mercy was a wall, and a wall does not win against a wave by being stronger than the water. It wins by still being there when the water is gone. Otha tried to send the order to pull back, to open the mouth, to give the tide room. He had the rank to send it. He sent it, and the Harvest Mother did not obey, because no Karun in 40 centuries had ever pulled a tide back from a wounded prey, and there was no instinct in the whole species for retreat, no muscle for it, no word in the carrion tongue that meant let go. The swarm knew converge, the swarm knew smother. The swarm did not know stop, and so it could not stop, and it kept closing on the gray ship with every hull it had, packing itself tighter around the one thing in the galaxy that grew stronger the tighter the prey was squeezed. Uther had once watched a prey world try to flood a Karuan boarding mass to drown it, and the water had only made the mass heavier and harder to kill. He thought of that now. He thought of how a thing built to take could be made to take the wrong thing, could be made to swallow what would open it from the inside, and he understood that the Long Mercy had not been built to fight the swarm at all. It had been built to be swallowed by it, and to be the one bite the harvest could not keep down. Inside the quiet harbor, Marn Aldis watched all of this through the cracked forward lens of the hospital's broadcast deck, with 2 fingers gone and frost on her sleeve, and she did not cheer, and she did not weep. She kept working. She had 3,040 wounded behind her, and a hull that was holding by the seal she had made with her own ruined hands, and she walked the wards while the war happened in the dark outside, and she told the frightened ones the only thing she knew to tell them. "The Long Mercy is here," she said. "We sent for her, and she came. Hold on." The wounded held on. There was a child on the 3rd ward, a colonist's daughter with a crushed leg from a mining collapse, on a world they had never bothered to log, and the child asked Marn Aldis if the gray ship was winning, and Marn Aldis, who never lied to the wounded, said the gray ship did not think about winning. "It thought about us," she said. "That is a different thing, and it is a stronger thing, and it is why we are still here. Hold on." The child asked one more thing, the thing children always ask, the thing the whole galaxy would soon be asking. She asked why the gray ship had come at all, when it could have stayed safe and far away. And Marn Aldis knelt by the small bed, in the cold and the dim light of a ship under siege, and she gave the child the only answer her people had, the answer that was a whole doctrine folded into one quiet sentence. "Because we called," she said, "and they are the kind of thing that comes when you call. That is all they are, under the gray and the cold light and the unbuilding. They are the thing that comes. Now hold on, and one day you will be the thing that comes too." And the child, who would in fact grow up to captain a hospital ship of her own, held on. And 11 light hours of empty dark away, where the Long Mercy had come from, 3 more cold points of light that no Karuan had filed as anything at all began, very quietly, to move. Because the gray ship had not come alone after all. It had only arrived alone, first, by itself, because that was the doctrine, and the doctrine had a name, and the name would be the worst thing the Karun ever learned. The doctrine was called First Mercy. The human fleets ran it the way they ran everything, plainly, with a flat reason underneath. When a cry for help came in, you did not send the fleet, you sent one ship, the nearest, the readiest, the first, and it went in alone, and it held the line by itself, for as long as it took the rest to cross the dark. One ship was not sent, because one ship was enough. One ship was sent because a cry could not wait for a fleet, and a wounded thing dying now did not care that help was 11 light hours out. So the first ship went, and it held, and it never once let the enemy see that it was holding, that it was alone, that anything at all was coming behind it. It simply stood over the wounded and did the next right thing, and the next. Calm hands in a screaming dark, and it bought the hours with its own gray hull. The Long Mercy had been bought those hours by a small woman with a sealing tool who had sent 6 words instead of a plea. Now the hours were nearly up. Uther Vumel, reckoner of the Grell Vanu, did the only thing left to a Karun who had begun, against 40 centuries of his blood, to think. He stopped reckoning the kill and started reckoning the cost. He counted the hulls the gray ship had unbuilt since the lights came on. The number was 460. He counted the time. The number was 31 minutes. He divided one by the other, and he sat very still in the warm, wet gut of the Harvest Mother, and understood that at this rate, the entire tithe swarm, 11,000 hulls, every clan mass, every Harvest Mother, 40 centuries of feeding lashed into one moving reef, would come apart in under 6 hours, and that not one shot the swarm could fire would change the arithmetic, because the gray ship was not in the kill business. It was in the unbuilding business, and the swarm was the single most unbuildable thing in the galaxy, a creature made entirely of the seams it had no name for letting go. He sent a different signal then. He sent it to the deep clan masses, the old slow ones at the back of the tide, that held the breeding holds and the youngling decks, the future of the species. He sent it in the oldest carrion tongue, the one used only when a harvest had turned. He told them to come about. To run. Nothing came about. Nothing ran. The breeding masses received his signal and did not move, because they too had no muscle for retreat, and the future of the Karuan sat in its warm holds and waited to converge on a thing that ate the converging. The gray ship reached the heart of the mouth. It passed within 900 meters of the Harvest Mother Grell Vanu herself, close enough that Othe could have counted the rivets if the human ship had any, which it did not, because it was one solid thing. It did not fire on the Harvest Mother. It went past her, slow and patient, toward the deeper masses, leaving the great 19-kilometer graveyard untouched at its back. And Othe understood that too, with a cold that went all the way to his root. The Long Mercy was saving the Harvest Mother for last, not out of mercy, out of arithmetic. The Harvest Mother was the most heavily welded mass in the tide, the one with the most seams, the one that would shed the most loose plating into the most other hulls when it finally came apart. The gray ship was going to unbuild the entire swarm first, pack the dead plates of 11,000 hulls into a crushing shell around its own center, and then open the Grell Vanu in the middle of it, so that the largest graveyard the galaxy had ever assembled would collapse inward on everything that remained. It was the patientest, coldest, most terrible thing Othe Vumel had ever read on a lens, and it was being done to save a hospital, and the small white ship at the center of it kept broadcasting, even now, even into the unfolding dark, its flat, patient message, changed once more by a woman with 8 fingers. "We are the quiet harbor," it said. "We are still here." The captain of the Long Mercy was a man named Dav Corrigan, and he had not raised his voice once in the whole engagement. The Karun did not know his name yet either. They would. Uther Vumel would learn it the way he learned everything now, by cutting deeper into the human signals, because the Reckoner had stopped trying to win and started trying to understand, which was the most dangerous thing a Karun had done in 40 centuries. He pulled the bridge feed off a relay the gray ship did not bother to encrypt, because the gray ship did not seem to care who heard it, and Othe listened to the inside of the thing that was unbuilding his species, and what he heard was not what he expected. He expected hatred. He found a man calling out coordinates in a level voice. "Bring us 9 degrees up. Hold there. Open the seam at the dorsal weld. Gentle. Let it walk." He expected fury. He found patience. He expected a war cry, the thing every species screamed at the moment of the kill. And the Long Mercy had no war cry, because the Long Mercy was not at the moment of the kill. It was, by its own quiet reckoning, simply at work, and work did not need to be loud. In 200 years, Othe had cut into 10,000 prey bridges in the last moments before a harvest, and every one of them had sounded the same, screaming, praying. The high broken sound of a crew that knows the math has turned against it. He had learned to listen for that sound the way a hunter listens for the gait of a wounded thing, because it told him exactly when a prey would break. The Long Mercy made none of it. The gray bridge was quieter than the dark around it. A man read coordinates. A younger voice read them back. Somewhere a third voice counted hulls unbuilt, flat, like a clerk counting stock, and the number climbed and the voices did not change, and Othe understood that he was listening to the one sound he had no name for. The sound of a crew that did not believe the math could turn against it, because they had built the math themselves. Corrigan said one thing in the 31st minute that Othe wrote down and kept for the rest of his life. A voice on the bridge, young, asked the captain why they had come back into the mouth, why they had not slipped the tide in the dark, gone cold again, run for the fleet, and brought the fleet back to a fair fight. The ship could have done it. Everyone aboard knew the ship could have done it. And Dav Corrigan answered, in the same level voice he used for coordinates, that the hospital could not run, and so the warship could not either, and that was the whole of it. There was nothing else to think about. "We don't leave the wounded to buy ourselves a better angle," he said. We are the better angle. Open the next seam. Uthavumel had spent 200 years certain he understood prey. Prey ran, prey hid, prey bargained and begged, and at the last, broke. He had never once, in 2 centuries, met a prey that turned back into the mouth, because something weaker than itself could not turn. And he sat in the gut of the Harvest Mother, and felt the whole architecture of his understanding open along a seam he had not known was there. Outside, the unbuilding went on. The swarm had stopped converging by the 40th minute, not by choice but by ruin. There was no longer a clean tide to converge. The inner third of the harvest had become a churn of loose plating, 4,000 centuries of stolen hulls, shedding their welds and grinding into each other. And the clan masses behind could not push through the wreck of the clan masses ahead. The mouth had jammed on its own dead, and the gray ship moved through the churn untouched, because the churn could not aim, because a thing made of seams cannot fire when its seams are coming apart, and the Long Mercy walked the wreck the way a surgeon walks a ward, unhurried, certain, opening exactly what needed to be opened and nothing more. Uther ran the count again at the 50th minute. 2,100 hulls unbuilt. The swarm had fired, in that time, some 90,000 lances, rails, and bolts at the gray ship. He pulled the damage reckoning off the human hull, and read it 3 times because he did not believe it. The Long Mercy had taken 11 hits that mattered. 11, out of 90,000. The rest had splashed. The hull that did not have an inside to reach had let the entire firepower of the largest harvest in galactic history wash across it like rain across a stone, and the 11 hits that landed had scorched the gray plating and changed nothing, and the ship had not slowed, and the man on the bridge had not raised his voice, and the number of unbuilt hulls kept climbing, while every captain in the tide watched it climb and could do nothing but feed it. It did not unbuild the breeding masses. Uthal saw this and did not understand it, and then understood it, and the understanding was worse than fear. The gray ship had reached the deep, slow masses at the back, the ones that held the youngling decks, the future of the Karun. It had them dead in its line. 1 pale stroke each, and 40 centuries of feeding would have no tomorrow, and the Long Mercy passed them by. It read them, somehow, knew what was in their holds, the way it had known the hospital was a hospital, and it left the breeding masses whole, and turned its slow nose back toward the war hulls, and the Harvest Mother, the things that had fired, the things that had come to harvest the wounded of 9 worlds. The warship was choosing. In the middle of an 11,000 hull harvest, with every reason and every right to unbuild the entire species, it was choosing what to open and what to spare, and it was sparing the holds that held no guns. And Othavumal wrote in the Carrion record a sentence that no Karuan reckoner had ever written, a sentence that broke a law of his blood, and the sentence was, "They are not like us." The Karuun, when a harvest turned, spared nothing. That was the deepest law, deeper than size, deeper than hunger. A prey that fought back was a prey that had to be unmade root and branch, young and old, so that no seed of resistance survived to grow a thing that might one day not be ripe. Othi had ordered the unmaking of 41 worlds that had fought, and on every one of them he had given the same final command, the one in the oldest tongue, the one that meant, "Leave no hold." And here was a thing with the power to leave no hold of the entire Karun species, a thing the swarm had fired 90,000 times and could not scratch, and it was choosing, in the heart of the mouth, to leave the holds with no guns alone. It was choosing to make a distinction the Karun did not have a word for, between the thing that did the harm and the young who had not yet learned to. Othe did a thing then that broke him further. He searched the Carrion record, all of it, 400 centuries of harvest, 940 broken worlds, for any prey that had ever made the same distinction the gray ship was making now, any species that, holding the power to leave no hold, had looked at the young of the thing that came to eat it and chosen to spare them. He searched the whole record. He found none. Every species the Karuan had ever met, when it had power, used the power to the root, because that was what power was for. That was the only thing power had ever been for, in the whole long history of the dark. And here, in the heart of the mouth, with every reason and every right, and no one anywhere to stop it, was a thing using its power for less than it could, on purpose, by a law it had written for itself, and Otha Vumel understood that he was not watching a stronger predator. He was watching a thing that was not a predator at all, a thing that had taken the shape of the most terrible weapon in the dark, and filled it with something the dark had never held before, and he did not have a word for that thing either, and he began, sitting in the gut of a dying graveyard, to be afraid in an entirely new way, the way you are afraid when you learn that the floor of the world is not where you thought it was. He sent one more order, against all his blood. He sent it to every clan mass still whole, in the oldest carrion tongue, the tongue of the turned harvest, and the order was a single word, and the word was one the Karun had never had, and Othe had to build it from pieces in the moment of sending, and the word he built meant yield. No mass obeyed it. The word had no meaning in them. It hit 40 centuries of blood, and found no muscle to move, and the masses converged, and Othi wept, which was a thing reckoners did not do, because he had finally found the bottom of his own people, and the bottom was that they could not be saved by anything except the thing that had come to unbuild them, and even that thing was trying. Even that thing kept holding its stroke to give them time, and they could not take it. Then the fleet arrived. It did not arrive the way the tide arrived. There was no reef of welded death blotting out the stars, no glow of fed hulls running hot across the spectrum. There was only, very suddenly, the dark behind the harvest going wrong in 3 places at once. 3 more holes in space, where the stars stopped, and then the holes lit, and then there were 4 gray walls instead of 1, and Othevumel understood the doctrine called First Mercy, all the way to the bottom. The first ship had not been sent, because 1 was enough. The first ship had been sent because a cry could not wait. And now that the cry had been answered, now that the wounded were held and the hours bought, the rest had come, and the rest was not a rescue. The rest was an answer to a question the Karuun had asked when they fired on a painted cross. The question was, what does it cost to attack a human hospital ship? The answer crossed the dark in 3 gray hulls and took up station around the dying harvest with the same cold patience the first ship had shown. And it began, without a war cry, without a raised voice, without one shot fired in anger, to finish the unbuilding. The 3 sisters did not race the long mercy to the count. They took the outer masses, the ones trying to flee the churn, and they unbuilt them at the edges so that nothing escaped. And they did it gently, 1 seam at a time, and the dark above Senat Reach, filled with the slow falling of 400 centuries of stolen plating, coming apart along the grain of its own making. The harvest mother Grel Vanu was the last. Otho felt her turn beneath him, all 19 kilometers of welded graveyard, 40 centuries of feeding, the largest mass that had ever fed, and he felt her try to run for the first time in her long life, and he felt her fail, because she had never been built to run, only to grow, and a thing that only grows cannot move when the things it grew from begin to let go. The 4 gray ships closed on her from 4 sides, slow and certain, and they did not fire. They waited. They held position around the great graveyard, the way the first ship had held position over the hospital, and they let her feel it, the unbuilding working its way inward through the wreck, plate by plate, seam by seam, the whole harvest collapsing toward its center where she sat, and Othi understood that they were giving her the same thing they had given everything. They were giving her time to stop. A human voice came across the open band then, not loud, the level voice of Dav Corrigan, and it spoke in the carrion tongue, badly, the way a being speaks a language it learned only to say one thing. And the one thing it said was, "You do not have to do this. Open your holds. Let the welds go. Let your young live. We are not here to end you. We are here to end the harvest." Otha Vumel translated it for the harvest mother. He had the rank. He had, for the first time in 200 years, the will. He told the great graveyard that the gray ships were offering a thing the Karun had no word for, a thing that was not death and was not victory, a thing that meant only let go, and he begged her, in the oldest tongue, to take it. He told her the count, 8,000 hulls unbuilt. He told her the time, 2 hours and 40 minutes. He told her, there was no number anywhere in the harvest that ended in anything but the unbuilding, and that the only choice left was whether the young in the holds she protected would be a future or a graveyard, and that the gray ships were holding their stroke, waiting to let her choose. And the harvest mother, 40 centuries of feeding, the largest mass that had ever fed, did the only thing her blood knew how to do. She converged. She drove her vast, slow bulk forward, into the gray ships, toward the small white hull at the center, because there was a harvest there, and a harvest was a thing to take, and there was no muscle in her anywhere for letting go. So the Long Mercy opened her. One pale stroke, thin as a wire, the color of cold iron, across the great central weld that had held 19 kilometers of graveyard into the shape of a hunter for 400 centuries. And the Grell Vanu came apart along the grain of her own making, every stolen plate falling away from every other, 400 centuries of feeding, unfolding back into the dead it had always been, and the collapse of her ran outward through the jammed and churning wreck of the whole harvest. And the 11,000 hull tithe swarm of the Karun finished, in the space of 19 minutes, becoming what it had always secretly been, which was a very large number of ships that had died a very long time ago. Otha Vumel did not die. He should have. He was in the gut of the Harvest Mother when she opened. But the gut of the Grell Vanu was an old clan thing the Harvest Mother had eaten 10 centuries before. A small thing, a single hull with a single seam, and when the great weld let go that small hull, simply drifted free, intact. A flake of graveyard spinning away from the collapse, with one living reckoner inside it. And Othe found himself alone in the dark above Senat Reach, with a forward lens and a carrion record, and nothing left to reckon. He turned the lens, by some instinct older than fear, toward the white ship. The quiet harbor was still there, scarred, breached, its painted cross burned half away, holding by a seal a woman had made with her own ruined hands, 3,040 wounded, still alive inside it. And around it the 4 gray walls of the human fleet held station in the drifting graveyard of the largest harvest the galaxy had ever assembled, and they did not cheer, and they did not pursue the flakes of wreck spinning away into the dark. And one of them, the first one, the Long Mercy, turned its blunt cold nose toward the small white hull and moved in close, gentle, the way a thing comes alongside a thing it has been protecting, and held there. And the broadcast deck of the quiet harbor, on the same open band the Karun had mocked for 6 days, sent its flat, patient message one more time, changed a final time by a woman with 8 fingers, and Otha Vumel, alone in his drifting flake of graveyard, received it clearly, because he had always had very good ears. "We are the quiet harbor," it said. "We are still here. Thank you for coming." The flake of graveyard that held Otha Vumel drifted for 9 days before the gray ship found it, and the gray ship did not have to look hard, because Otha had been broadcasting. He had not meant to at first. He had sat in the cold dark with his lens and his carrion record, and watched the human fleet do the thing he could not have predicted, which was to stay. The Long Mercy and its 3 sister walls did not leave when the harvest was undone. They held station above Senat Reach for 9 days, and in those 9 days, they did not hunt the drifting wreck for salvage, did not strip the dead masses for plating the way any Karun would have, did not take a single bolt of the 400 centuries of metal floating free around them. They worked on the hospital instead. This was the thing Othi could not stop watching. 400 centuries of harvest floated dead and free around the gray ships, the richest salvage the galaxy had ever held, more metal in one place than the Karun had gathered in their entire history, and the humans did not take it. A Karun fleet would have spent a generation stripping that wreck. The Long Mercy turned its back on it. It put its crews not into the salvage but into the hospital, and Othi understood, slowly, that the humans did not see metal when they looked at the dead swarm. They saw a grave. And you did not strip a grave. You left it, and you tended the living, and you went home. They sent crews across to the quiet harbor in small craft, by hand, and they patched the breach a woman had sealed, and they pressurized the wards, and they moved 3,040 wounded into warm light, and the whole time the white ship kept broadcasting its flat, patient message into a dark that no longer held anything to threaten it. On the 6th day, a second hospital ship arrived from the human lanes, the Steady Light, twin to the quiet harbor, and it took the worst of the wounded aboard, and the 2 white ships floated side by side in the graveyard, crosses bright against the dark, and the gray walls held station around them, like a thing standing watch over a thing it loved. On the 3rd day, a thing happened that Otha Vumel would carry to the end of his life. A flake of wreck near his own, A torn piece of clan mass still held 3 living Karun, boarders who had clung to the gray hull and somehow drifted free when their air ran low, alive by a margin of minutes. They were the enemy. They had crossed the gap to cut open a human ship, and the Long Mercy read them on its lens, 3 failing carrion things in a drifting scrap, and it sent a small craft, and it took them aboard, and it warmed them, and it gave them air, and it put them in the white wards beside the wounded of 9 worlds they had come to harvest, and it mended them. Other watched it on his lens, and could not make the math work, because there was no math in it. There was only the doctrine, which did not ask whose wounded a wounded thing was. You did not leave the wounded. The Karun had been the wounded, 3 of them, and so the humans had come for the Karun, the same as for anyone, because a cry was a cry, and the gray ships answered cries. Other sat in his flake, and understood that if he sent his own signal, the same thing would come for him, the thing that had unbuilt his swarm, and it would not come to finish him. It would come to mend him, and that, more than the cold light, more than the unbuilding, was the thing that finally turned the last weld in the reckoner over. On the 4th day, Othevumal turned on his own signal and answered the broadcast. He did not know why. He had no rank left to speak for, no harvest to reckon, no clan mass to report to. The tithe swarm was a cloud of dead plates spreading slow across the reach. But he had spent 200 years saying one kind of thing into the dark, the carrion thing, the ripe thing, and he found he could not die without saying a different kind of thing once, and so he opened a band to the white ships and the gray walls around them, and he said, in the carrion tongue, and then, badly, in the human flat speech he had cut out of their signals, that he was a reckoner of the Grel Vanu, that he had logged their hospital as a 4-hour task, that he had been wrong, and that he did not understand why they had spared the holds. It was Marn Aldis who answered him, not a captain, not a warship. The small woman with 8 fingers, on the broadcast deck of the quiet harbor, took the band herself. She did not gloat, she did not threaten. She asked him a question, and the question undid more of Othevumal than the unbuilding of the entire swarm had done. She asked him how many of his young were on the masses they had spared. He counted. He had the record. The number was a number he had never once thought to count before, because the Karun did not count their young, they counted their kills, and the counting of it took him a long time, and when it was done, the number was very large. The number was 900,000. He told her the number. And Marn Aldis, on the broadcast deck of a ship the Karun had tried to harvest, was quiet for a moment, and then she said that the gray ships had spared the holds because a young thing that has not yet learned to eat the wounded is not the same as the thing that taught it, and that her people had a doctrine about who you answer and who you spare, and the doctrine was old and it was plain, and it had a flat reason underneath, and the reason was that you do not pay forward the harvest. You break it, and then you stop. Othevumal asked her what the doctrine was called. She told him it was called First Mercy, and that the warship that had unbuilt his swarm was named for it, the Long Mercy, and that the names were not a joke, though he had taken them for one. The Mercy was first. It came before the war, and it came after the war, and the war existed only to make a space where the Mercy could happen. The gray ship had not come to Senat Reach to kill the Karun. It had come because a wounded thing sent for help, and a wounded thing dying now could not wait for a fleet, and so the first ship went in alone and held the line by itself until the wounded were safe. The unbuilding of the swarm was not the purpose. The unbuilding of the swarm was only what it had cost to keep 3,000 people alive in a breached white hull, and the humans had paid that cost without raising their voices, because to them, it was simply the next right thing, and then the next. Utha sat in his flake of graveyard and thought about 40 centuries of feeding, and the single word ripe, and the way his whole species had read a painted cross as a thing already gathered. And he understood, finally, the size of the mistake the Karun had made, and it was not the mistake of attacking a stronger thing. It was the mistake of believing that a thing which protects the weak is itself weak. The humans had built their entire war soul on the opposite belief. The strongest thing they had, the gray walls that could unbuild a galaxy, they had pointed not outward at conquest but inward at the wounded, made into a shield around the sick and the cut open and the half-mended, and they had done it so completely that the cruelest weapon in the dark was named for mercy, and the doctrine that governed it put the saving first and the killing last. The Karun had measured strength in mass, in welds, in the number of dead a thing had eaten. The humans measured it in how many living things one hull could stand over while the dark poured in. By the Karun measure, the Long Mercy was a speck. By the true measure, it was the largest thing that had ever crossed the reach, because it could hold the whole weight of 3,000 frightened people on its gray back and not bend, and the Grel Vanu, 19 kilometers of graveyard, could not hold one. Uthi asked Marn Aldis one more thing, on the 5th day. He asked why she had not begged. Every prey begged. He had built his whole understanding of the galaxy on the certainty that a wounded thing begged, because the begging was the sound of ripe, and she had not made it. She had sent 6 words, and called the gray ship come. He asked her how she had known not to beg. And Marn Aldis, who never lied to the wounded, and would not lie to a broken reckoner either, said that she had not known anything. She said she had simply decided, in the 90 seconds with her hand in the breach, that she was not going to spend her last words on a thing that had already decided she was meat. She had spent them instead on a thing that might come. Begging was talking to the teeth, she said. We don't talk to the teeth. We send for the gray ship, and we hold on. And if the gray ship is too far, we hold on anyway, because holding on is the thing, it is the only thing, it is the whole thing, and a people that holds on long enough is a people that gets answered. Othe wrote that in the Carrion record too. Holding on is the thing. He did not have a word for it in the Carrion tongue. He would have to make one. On the 7th day, Othe asked Marn Aldis the question that had been growing in him since the lights came on, the question under all the others, the one a reckoner, who had logged 940 broken worlds, had never once thought to ask. He asked her whether the humans were not afraid that mercy would make them weak. He asked it plainly. He told her what every Karun knew in the blood, that a thing which spares is a thing which will one day be spared into the grave, that the harvest existed because softness died, that 40 centuries of feeding had proven, on 940 worlds, that the merciful were the first to be taken. He asked her how a people could point its strength at the wounded, and not, in time, become the wounded. And Marn Aldis was quiet for a long while, longer than she had been quiet about anything, and then she told him about the world Captain Corrigan had spoken of, the one the humans had learned the doctrine on, the one Othe would never see. She did not name it. She said only that there had been a time, long ago, before the gray ships, when humans had believed exactly what the Karun believed. That softness died, that you spent the weak to save the strong, that you did not throw good hulls after lost ones. And she said that her people had followed that belief all the way to its bottom, the way the Karun had, and that the bottom of it was a world that ate its own wounded to feed its own war, and called it strength, and grew very strong, and won everything, and woke one morning to find it had become the thing it had been fighting, a harvest with a flag, and there was no one left to spare it, because it had taught the whole dark that no one would be spared. And she said the humans had looked at what they had become, and they had been sick, the way Othe was sick now, sitting in his flake, and they had made a choice. Not a soft choice, the hardest choice, a strong thing ever makes. They had chosen to point the strength the other way, to build the cold light into a thing called mercy, and put the saving first, not because it was safe, because the other way had a bottom, and they had seen the bottom, and they would rather die holding the line over a hospital than live one more day as the tide. Mercy did not make them weak, she told Othe. Mercy was the only thing that had ever made them anything but a swarm. The strength was always there. The Long Mercy could unbuild a galaxy, she said. You saw it. You of all people saw it. The question was never whether we were strong. The question was what we would point the strength at. And we pointed at you, even now. Because the day we stop is the day we become you, and we have already been you, and we are never going back. Hold on, Reckoner. You are wounded. We came for you too. Uther Vumel sat in the cold gut of a dead clan thing and understood the last weld in himself let go. The Karun had been certain the merciful died, and they were right. The merciful had died, once, the human merciful, in the war Marn Aldis would not name. But the humans had not concluded from that death that mercy was weakness. They had concluded that mercy was so strong it had to be armored, had to be given a gray hull and cold light and a doctrine, had to be made into the most terrible thing in the dark, precisely so that it would never die again, so that no harvest could ever take it. The Karun had armored their hunger, the humans had armored their mercy. That was the whole of the difference, and it was the difference between a tide and a wall, and Otha Vumel finally understood which one he had spent 200 years being, and which one had just spared his life. On the 9th day, the Long Mercy came alongside Othi's drifting flake, and Othi did not run, because he had nowhere to run and nothing left to run with, and because he wanted, more than he had ever wanted a harvest, to see the thing up close. A small craft crossed the gap by hand. A human came aboard his flake in a suit, alone, unarmed, and it was the captain, Dav Corrigan, the man who had not raised his voice, and he stood in the cold gut of a dead Karun clan thing, across from the last reckoner of the Grel Vanu, and he did not speak first. He waited. He let Otha choose what to say. Uther Vumal chose to ask the only question left in him. He asked why the captain had come himself, alone and unarmed, to a thing that had tried to harvest his wounded. And Dav Corrigan answered, in his level voice, that a reckoner who turns on his own record and asks why the young were spared is not a thing to be harvested. He is a thing to be answered. The captain said that the Karun had received 40 centuries of pleas, and read every one as ripe, and that maybe the reason was that no one had ever sent the swarm anything but pleas, and that he was not here to plead. He was here to do the thing the humans did when a cry came in. He had come to answer it. Then he gave Othi Vumal the carrion record back, the one the reckoner had cut from the human signals, full of bridge feeds and coordinates, and the words, "We are the better angle," and he added something to it, a copy of the human record of the same 9 days, the full plain account of the doctrine, and the count, and the sparing, and he told Othe to keep all of it, and to take it home to the breeding masses they had spared, and to read it aloud to the young, all of it, the unbuilding and the sparing and the 9 days of staying, so that the next 40 centuries of Karun would grow up knowing one thing their ancestors had not. That a painted cross is not a harvest, it is a line, and on the other side of the line stands a gray ship that will not raise its voice, and will not leave the wounded, and will come. Other took the record. His hands shook, the old reckoner hands that had logged 940 broken worlds, and they shook, holding the thing that would unbuild his people far more thoroughly than any pale stroke of cold light, because it would unbuild the one weld at the center of the Karun, the belief that size was law and the weak were ripe, and that weld, once opened, would not grow back. He asked the captain one last thing. He asked whether the humans would now hunt the masses they had spared, the way the Karun would have, to be sure the harvest never reformed. Dave Corrigan looked at him through the visor of the suit, and his level voice did not change, and he said no. He said the masses had no guns and held no harvest, and carried only young, and that you do not pay forward the war any more than you pay forward the harvest. You break the thing that does the harm, and then you stop, and then you go home, because the going home is the whole point, and a fleet that does not know how to stop is just a slower kind of swarm. He said the humans had learned that the long way, a long time ago, on a world Uther would never see, and that they had built the doctrine out of it, and that the doctrine was the only thing they were truly proud of, more than the gray walls, more than the cold light, more than the unbuilding. We are not proud that we can take a harvest apart, Corrigan said. Anyone strong enough can break a thing. We are proud that we came for the hospital first, and that when it was over, we stopped. Take that home. Read it to the young. Then he turned, and he crossed the gap back to the Long Mercy by hand, and the gray ship and its 3 sister walls gathered the small craft, and the crews, and the 3,040 mended wounded, and the 2 white hospitals fell into formation, between the gray walls, and they came about, slow and patient, and they began the long crossing back into the dark from which they had come, leaving the drifting graveyard of the largest harvest the galaxy had ever assembled untouched behind them, 400 centuries of stolen metal that no human hand would ever salvage, because to salvage it would have been to begin the harvest again, and the humans did not begin harvests, they ended them. And the white ships, on the same open band the Karun had mocked, sent their flat, patient message into the dark one final time, as they turned for home, and Othi Vumal, alone in his flake of graveyard with a record in his shaking hands, received it clearly, because he had always had very good ears, and would never again use them only to listen for the word ripe. Uther Vumel took the record home, and the record changed the galaxy's fate, and it did not do it the way a weapon does. He crossed the dark for 2 years in his flake of graveyard, eating the stores of a clan thing dead 10 centuries, and he found the breeding masses where they had drifted, slow and leaderless, the future of the Karun sitting in its warm holds with no harvest mother left to tell it what to converge on. There were 60 of them, 900,000 young. They received him the way the swarm received everything, with hunger, because hunger was the only thing the Karun had ever been. They read his small flake as a thing to take. And Althavumal, alone and unarmed and carrying nothing but a record, did the most dangerous thing a Karun had done in 400 centuries. He broadcast first. He sent them the record, all of it. The bridge feed of a man who did not raise his voice. The pale stroke of cold light that unbuilt a swarm. The 9 days the gray ship stayed and took no salvage. The words, "We are the better angle, and you do not pay forward the harvest, and we are proud that we came for the hospital first." He sent them the number of their own young, the gray ships had spared. 900,000, the number no Karun had ever counted. And he sent them the question Marn Aldis had asked him, the one that had undone him, and he made the breeding masses count their young, all of them, every hold, for the first time in the history of the species. The counting took the young masses a long time, and when it was done, the number was very large, and the Karun, for the first time in 400 centuries, looked at a large number that was not a number of kills, and did not know what to feel, because they had no word for it, and a people that finds a thing it has no word for has already begun to change. They did not eat Othavumel. They listened to him. It was the first time in the history of the tithe swarm that a converging mass had stopped without smothering its prey, and the stopping was a muscle the Karun did not have, and so it hurt them to do it, the way it hurts to use a limb that has never moved, but they did it, and the doing of it opened the one weld at the center of the species, the belief that the weak were ripe, and the weld did not grow back. It did not happen quickly, because nothing about the Karun was quick except their hunger. There were masses that would not listen, that broke from the breeding holds, and went out into the dark to harvest the old way, because 40 centuries of blood does not let go in a single season. Uther followed them. He did not fight them, because he had nothing to fight with, and because he had learned from the gray ship that you do not pay forward the war. He broadcast to them. He sent the record ahead of every clan mass that ran for a harvest, so that the prey worlds heard it before the tide arrived, and the prey worlds learned to send the same 6 words the hospital had sent, into the same dark, to the same cold point of light, and more than once a clan mass that crossed the reach to feed found a gray wall already there, cold and patient and waiting, holding station over the thing it had come to take. The gray ships never raised their voices to those clan masses either. They unbuilt the war hulls, and spared the holds, and handed the survivors a record, and told them to take it home. And the survivors took it home. And the record spread through the Karun the way the unbuilding had spread through the swarm, seam by seam, mass by mass, until the thing that had been the most fearsome harvest in the dark began to come apart along the grain of its own making, and what fell out of it was not a graveyard. It was a people. There was a season, near the middle of it, that the Karun would later call the long quiet, when the change hung in the balance, and could have gone either way. Half the masses had laid down the harvest, and half had not, and the two halves drifted in the same dark, and the old way and the new way looked at each other across a narrow gap, and neither could yet say which was the Karun. The masses that still harvested were stronger. They were fed. The masses that had stopped were lean and slow and full of young ben. They now refused to spend, and by every law the Karun had ever known the fed should have eaten the lean, the way it had always been, size as law, the biggest mass taking the rest. It did not happen, and the reason it did not happen was the record, because every Karun, fed or lean, old way or new, had heard it now, had heard the count of unbuilt hulls and the 9 days of staying, and the 3 borders mended in the white wards, and not one mass that still harvested could look at a lean mass full of spared young without seeing the gray ship, without knowing in its blood that on the other side of every harvest there now stood a thing that would not raise its voice, and would not leave the wounded, and would come, and that the thing did not care how fed you were, because it did not measure mass. It measured only whether you had come for the hospital first. The fed masses found, when they reached to take the lean, that the old hunger had a new thing standing behind it now, a cold, patient gray thing, and they could not reach past it, and slowly, season by season, the reaching stopped, and the long quiet ended, and the lean way became the only way, because it was the way that the strongest thing in the dark had said was the right one, and the Karun had spent 40 centuries worshipping the strongest thing in the dark, and now the strongest thing in the dark had told them to lay down their teeth, and a people that worships strength will follow strength anywhere, even into mercy. That was the trap the gray ship had set, without ever knowing it set it. It had not argued the Karun out of the harvest. You could not argue a thing out of 40 centuries of blood. It had simply been stronger than the harvest, and kinder than the harvest, both at once, in the same hull, in front of the whole swarm, and a people that only respected strength had finally met a strength it had to respect, that pointed the other way, and it followed. It took 90 years. Uthavumul did not see the end of it. He was old when he reached the breeding masses, and he was older when the change took hold, and somewhere in the long, slow turning of the Karun from a harvest into a people, he simply stopped, the way old reckoners do, in the warm gut of a hold full of young, who had been taught to count something other than the dead. They did not eat his body, which was the old way. They kept it. They built a small thing around it, a single clean hull, the first thing the Karun ever built instead of stole, and they put his carrion record inside it, worn soft with reading, and they sent it out into the lanes as a marker, so that any clan mass that still ran hot for a harvest would cross its path and receive, one last time, the record of the reckoner who turned. They called the hull, in the new carrion tongue, by a word they had made because they had needed one, and the word meant the one who held on. The record outlived him. It was read aloud to every generation, in the oldest carrion tongue, and the young who heard it did not grow up believing that size was law and a painted cross was a thing already gathered. They grew up believing that on the other side of the line there was a gray ship that would not raise its voice and would not leave the wounded and would come, and that the only thing worth being proud of was coming for the hospital first and stopping when it was done. The Karun stopped harvesting, not because they were beaten. They had been beaten before, and it had only made them hungrier. They stopped because a reckoner had brought home a record of a thing stronger than they were that chose to point its strength at the wounded instead of the weak, and that record was the one weapon in the galaxy the swarm had no plating thick enough to splash. It got all the way down. It unbuilt the law at the center of them, and they let it go, the way the gray ship had taught the whole tide to let go, plate by plate, weld by weld, until the thing that had been the most fearsome harvest in the dark was only a very large number of people who had finally learned to count their young. 40 centuries of feeding ended in 90 years, and it ended without a fleet, and it ended because a small woman with a sealing tool sent 6 words instead of a plea. The humans never knew. That was the part the galaxy found hardest to believe, in the long telling of it afterward. The Long Mercy crossed the dark home and was logged and refitted and sent out again on the doctrine called First Mercy, to answer the next cry, and the next. And Dav Corrigan grew old in its bridge, and handed it to a younger captain, and the gray ship went on being the first to arrive and the last to leave. And in all of that the humans never learned that the record they handed back to a broken reckoner above Senat Reach had unmade the tithe swarm more completely than any pale stroke of light. They had not done it to unmake the swarm. They had done it because a reckoner who turns on his own record is a thing to be answered, and answering things was simply what they did, and they did not stay to watch what their answers grew into, because the staying to watch was a kind of harvest too, a gathering of credit, and the humans did not gather. They came, and they held the line, and they stopped, and they went home. It was Marn Aldous who learned, in the end, and only by accident, and only once. She was old by then. A fleet surgeon retired to a quiet station above the world the quiet harbor was named for, 8 fingers, and a long memory, and a ship came in from the deep lanes, carrying a thing no human had seen before. A Karun hull, but not a harvest mass, not a reef of welded death running hot across the spectrum. One clean ship, made of one piece, built and not stolen, cold-running and blunt and almost shy, and it carried no lance and no rail and no missile cradle, and it had a symbol on every flank, repeated 9 times down the hull. It was not a cross. The Karun had no cross. It was a circle, an open hold with the young inside, the thing they had finally learned to count, and beside it, in the human flat speech, badly, the way a being writes a language it learned only to say one thing, were 4 words. We came for you. It was a hospital ship. The Karun had built a hospital ship, the first in 400 centuries, and they had crossed the dark in it, not to harvest, but to answer, because a record had taught them that on the other side of every line, there was a wounded thing that could not wait, and that the strongest thing a people could do was point its strength at that wounded thing and come. Marn Aldis went out to meet it in a small craft, by hand, the way the gray ships had taught the whole galaxy to do, and she crossed the gap to the cold, clean Karun hull, and she was met at the lock by a young reckoner who had never logged a kill in its life, who carried, folded and worn soft with 90 years of reading, a record. The bridge feet of a man who did not raise his voice, the 9 days of staying, the 6 words a woman sent instead of a plea. The young reckoner asked her, in the human flat speech, whether she was the one who had sealed the breach. She said she was. She held up the hand with 8 fingers, and the young Karun looked at it the way the young look at the thing their whole world was built around, and then it did a thing no Karun had done in 400 centuries, a thing it had been taught from a record, a thing that was the deepest unbuilding of all. It lowered its mass before her, not in fear. The Karun knew fear, had always known fear. Fear was easy. This was the other thing, the thing they had finally found a word for in 90 years of being answered, and the word, in the new Carrion tongue, meant thank you for coming, and it was the same 6 words a hospital had broadcast into the dark above Senat Reach, and it had taken a species 400 centuries, and 1 gray ship and 1 small woman, to learn how to say them. The young reckoner told her, then, what the hull was carrying. It was carrying wounded. There was a world 3 lanes out, a small thing, not Karun, a people the old swarm would have read as ripe in a heartbeat, and the world had been hit by a stellar flare, its colonies cracked open, its hospitals gone, and it had sent into the dark the only thing it had left, a cry, the begging sound, the sound that for 40 centuries had meant ripe. And the Karun had heard it, and the Karun had not come to harvest. They had built this clean white-circled hull as fast as they could weld, and they had crossed 3 lanes, and they had come for the wounded, and they had stopped at the human station, only to ask one thing, because they were new at this, and did not want to do it wrong. They had come to ask Marn Aldis how to hold on. She did not weep, because she had never been a weeper, and she did not gloat, because there was nothing in her to gloat with. She put her 8-fingered hand on the cold, clean hull of the first Karun ship ever built to heal instead of harvest, and she taught them. She taught them the seal and the ward, and the warm light, and the flat, patient message, and she taught them the only thing that mattered, the thing under all the rest, which was that you do not leave the wounded to buy yourself a better angle, because you are the better angle, and there is nothing else to think about. And when the lesson was done, she said the only thing she knew to say, the flat, patient thing, the thing the quiet harbor had broadcast into a dark full of teeth, and gone on broadcasting until the teeth came apart. We are still here, she said. Thank you for coming. And the galaxy's fate, which had been a line of harvest stretching forward into the dark for 40 more centuries, the slow, inevitable feeding of every wounded thing that ever sent a plea, was changed, fully and finally, not by the unbuilding of a swarm, but by what grew from the choice, to spare its young, and hand a broken reckoner a record, and then go home, without staying to be thanked. 1 warship had crossed 11 light hours alone, because a cry could not wait. It had held the line over a hospital it had every reason to abandon for a better angle, and it had not raised its voice, and it had not left the wounded, and when the harvest was undone it had stopped, and it had spared the holds with no guns, and it had given the enemy back its own record, and told it to read it to the young. And the record had done what no fleet could do. It had reached the one weld at the center of the most fearsome thing in the dark, the belief that the weak were ripe, and it had opened that weld gently, the way the long mercy opened everything, and let it go. That was the whole of it. There was nothing else to think about. Somewhere in the deep lanes, on a cold, clean hull marked with an open circle and 4 badly written words, a record worn soft with reading, was read aloud to a new generation of young who would never log a kill, and the record ended the way it always ended, with the words a man named Dav Corrigan had spoken to a broken reckoner in the gut of a dead clan thing above Senat Reach, the words that were now the first law of a people who had once been a harvest. You break the thing that does the harm, and then you stop, and then you go home. We came for the hospital first, and on the other side of every line in the long dark, the wounded sent their cries, and they were no longer met by a tide. They were met by a circle, and a cross, and a gray wall that would not raise its voice, and would not leave them, and would come, and the galaxy, which had spent 40 centuries learning to be afraid of the dark, began, one answered cry at a time, to learn that it did not have to be. The quiet harbor flew for 90 more years, scarred cross and all, and was retired at last to a quiet orbit above the world it was named for, and they never repainted the breach a woman had sealed with her own ruined hands. They left it, a long black scar across the painted cross, the mark of the day the Karuan fired on a hospital, and learned what waited on the other side of the line. The young who came to see it asked why it had never been mended, and the old surgeon, eight-fingered, would tell them the same flat patient thing every time. Because the breach is the whole story, she said. Anyone can paint a clean cross. We are not proud of the clean cross. We are proud of the day it was burned, and held, and answered, and that when it was over, we stopped. Look at the scar, then go home, and when a cry comes, be the kind of thing that comes. The young always asked the same last question. They asked whether the Karun ever came back. And Marn Aldis, every time, would point her eight-fingered hand at the cold, clean hull, moored alongside the quiet harbor, the one with the open circle, and the 4 badly written words, the first hospital ship a harvest had ever built, now the oldest ship in a fleet of them, and she would smile the small, flat smile of a woman who had sealed a breach with her own hands, and lived to see the dark change, and she would say the truest thing in the galaxy. They never left, she said. They answer cries now, same as us. That is what one warship did. It did not just save us. It showed the thing that came to eat us what we were, and the thing looked, and it could not unsee it, and it laid down its teeth and picked up a cross. Go home, child. When the cry comes, you will know what to do. We came for the hospital first. We always will.